Thank you. So yeah, like I said, this month I'm going to kind of continue tailored conversation, examining the Worcester's housing stock and beyond Massachusetts in general. Presentation on simple, complex measures improving buildings' performance. So some of the things we're going to talk about today: triple decker in terms of renovation priorities, value as it pertains to triple decker specifically, but extended to small multifamily, some single family. We'll talk about return on investment versus the value of investment. Upgrades like buildings, they work as systems. One thing is going to affect another. So one thing I just want to kind of start with here, this is a property near Boston, a couple properties near Boston, Hampstead Street. Same street, few houses away. One is a 3-family, 7-bed, 3-bath, valued at $1.76 million. The other one, 61, 3-family, 8-bed, 3-bath, 1.72. These would be considered comps in real estate. So what's the real difference between these buildings besides the 40,000 and extra bedroom? Well, one of these had a deep energy retrofit, 61, back in 2011 with Big Meister and I believe consulted by Building Science Corporation. So they super insulated the roof, the R60 roof, R40 walls, U22 windows, 2 inches of closed cell on the foundation and the slab, sealed combustion system, 97% efficient boiler, 48% reduced heating and cooling costs, HRV, fresh air every room, moisture problems solved, healthier indoor air quality, but somehow not reflected in the real estate value. So why do we do these things? So from a real estate perspective, if you're looking at purely simple payback, doesn't seem like those kind of improvements maybe didn't have a return on investment. So a little more as we go on here. So here's the existing situation. There's nearly 5,000 triple deckers in the Worcester area alone. These ones specifically were taken by Worcester earlier today in Southbridge. Similar housing stock. Won't spend too much time, on the existing conditions. There's certainly some things that need to be addressed regardless of, where that return on investment is. You can actually see on the right here the tannish building. There's actually doors where it meets up with the white building there. There used to be some balconies there, but now it's a straight drop down. Things bear a little more priority than energy efficiency, performance, those kind of issues. But this is the house.
Cheaper not to do it right.
It is a lot cheaper not to do it right. It's even cheaper if these houses haven't been touched in the past 20 years. But obviously, there's a range of improvements that have been made or have not been made, anywhere from nothing to complete deep energy retrofits. And some of these. Hopefully, we've all seen Money Pit. No?
Oh, yeah. One of my favorites.
So, drafty, uncomfortable buildings, the majority of them. We got the old snowman boilers in some of these. I've seen a lot more dead than alive. I don't know about you, but that asbestos blanket around them doesn't make them too mobile, or at least cheap to move. Lots of freezing pipes, broken chimneys, venting right into the space. Non-existent or poor cooling solutions. Unfortunately, I'm a victim of this. My window AC happened to hang right above my my slider, and the AC dripped, and it wasn't flashed properly underneath, so it just poured down the back of the siding, sat on top of the sliding door for installed, and The thing was completely rotten away. When I pulled up the header, just fell down like dirt, like nothing was even there. So not all cooling solutions are created equal. It's safe to say. Obviously, high utility bills come with poor performing homes. No surprise there. Old, inefficient, broken, missing things in some cases. I'm shocked to see how many don't have doors to the basement. Not only from a security standpoint, but just all the air rushing right in, just completely left wide open.
I'm one of those.
We'll keep it between us. We're not recording or anything.
All right.
Yep. Mold, mildew throughout, some visible and some invisible. Attics, living space, bathrooms, basements, mold on storage in those spaces. Unusable basements, wet, damp, dirty basements, crawl spaces, knee wall areas, inaccessible, just volume being unused. My house, again, I'm not going to store anything in my basement because I know all the water just comes right in. Water infiltration. Ken and I were lucky enough to see an example of this yesterday, or maybe not so lucky for the owner. Ice dams causing damage above the exterior wall, damping in the wall with vapor drive, pushing out and causing paint on the outside to blister like that. Never mind the damage on the inside of the building to the sheetrock, plaster, the wall itself, the insulation slumps down like it's not even there. Improperly flashed windows, wet face, of course. Sick home syndrome, again, mold, odors. I don't know if anybody, if you cook some bacon and you still smell it a week later, you might have an issue with indoor air quality. That's always my telltale sign. Unsafe electrical. I know that you're not supposed to be able to buy homes without a sign off saying the knob and tube has been all disconnected in a home. Again, we're talking about triple deckers. We kind of have to assume they all had it at some point, but even in the Mass Save program, we're not able to insulate any cavities without having a sign off from an electrician. And homeowners always push back. Well, I had a sign off by an inspector. Well, about half the time they find a strand that's still live somewhere in the home. It's shocking how much live knob and tube there's still left in homes. And inherently by itself, it's not necessarily unsafe, but if you want insulation in those cavities, yeah, you need to have it removed. And of course, exposed panels, ungrounded outlets, all major hazards. So where do we start? How do homeowners, property managers usually make these decisions? Well, obviously they're going to look at the safety legal requirements, looking at major things, but not necessarily holistically. Not usually looking at things like ADA compliance. Most markets need pretty quick turnover, quick fixes. Decisions based mostly on return investment, monetary calculation, not really looking at the value of things. When we talk about return on investment, ROI versus value investment, VOI, ROI is a simple payback. If I replace this 100-watt light bulb in a common hallway, it's on for 4 hours a day, 15-watt LED bulb, I'll save about $28 a year. An LED bulb is $2, so my return on investment, 26 days. Quick, things like that. Usually homeowners, property managers can see things like that, short returns on investment. And then, of course, the intangible value of things. LED bulb is going to last significantly longer. I don't have to worry about replacing it nearly as often. Those things you can't necessarily put a dollar value on, and that's where we talk about ROI versus VOI. So where we need to prioritize: safety, health, both of occupants and the building itself, building durability, rentability. You know, the aesthetics do play a factor. You know, it doesn't matter how many improvements you make to a home. If somebody walks in and it smells funny, it's going to be tough to rent, and you're going to lose some months of rent right there. ROI versus VOI. Generally speaking, building enclosures, HVAC upgrades, check off most of, if not all of these boxes. So that's where we start. Moisture mitigation. So again, looking from a homeowner or a property manager's perspective, some electricity savings you'll get from a dehumidifier. There's a little bit of payback there for small things that can be done, but the value of moisture mitigation, healthier indoor air quality, of course, mold prevention, avoiding long-term structural damage to your building durability. Be nice to have a dry storage space, of course. Dehumidifiers, by the way, generally about $20, $30 a month is what they cost for regular use. Obviously, a lot higher if you have a major moisture issue, like an open sump pit, or if you have your dryer venting into your basement. I can't tell you how many times I see the lint trap. Yeah, it's vented to a bucket of water that just sprays into the basement. Simple things that can be done. Vent the dryer outside, very easy. Installing a vapor barrier over any dirt floor where you have exposed moisture sources, wrapping it up, foundation walls. Of course, this one's a little more elaborate here, but even just going up to the poured foundation, if you have that, anything's better than having an exposed dirt floor. Closing sump pits, venting bathroom fans properly. I don't know why this is still okay to have a bathroom fan vented to a soffit and right next to soffit vents, like air doesn't just turn right back around and come back into the attic. More mold issues are caused by that alone than I think anything else in the attic.
I had an architect tell me that it doesn't matter because during the summer, the attic sees more humidity than that on a regular basis, so it doesn't matter.
Well, how many showers you take in, how hot is the water, you know, I like to see the math on that.
It blew my mind, but yeah, it was good.
Silly things.
You just need to draw the arrows to the air going a different direction. Right, Ken?
That's right.
just tell the air not to go that way. That's
Right.
all you need to do.
Draw the arrows on the plan and you're all set.
Then, of course, you get into the more complicated issues. A lot of these older homes, if they have an older addition, they built right over the ground. They don't bother digging it out. They don't bother pouring a foundation. It's just an inaccessible crawl space, 6 to 12 inches. Run some pipes, run some ductwork through that area. Not very helpful especially if it's connected to your basement, or it's exposed to the underside of the floor of that addition. So making that crawl space accessible, even if it means digging it out a little bit, that's important in terms of durability and moisture mitigation in the long term. Just because you have new windows doesn't mean they're installed correctly. So checking the flashing on those windows and making sure they're flashed in the first place or reflashed if they were done improperly, that goes a long way. And then, of course, the hidden mold growth, which is a symptom of the moisture issue. This isn't a picture here, but a lot of times, especially in these triple deckers, People love to nail the wood paneling either right over the broken/cracked plaster, or there's nothing behind there. It's just right over the studs, and all the moisture goes right through the seams to the back side of the sheathing, and a giant mold problem that's been there for years. So having an actual air barrier there is important, or vapor barrier rather. So additional considerations when we're talking about moisture. Humidity will increase with enclosure tightening. So if you're not addressing the moisture issue before making your building tighter, the moisture in the air becomes stagnant and has nowhere to go. These triple deckers worked just fine before we went and insulated these things. So once we make them tighter and we stop that stack effect and stop that moisture rising up through the house and the heating system running all the time, all of a sudden that moisture has nowhere to go. So we have to remember how that impacts the performance of the building as a whole. Inaccessible crawl spaces. Just because you don't need access right now doesn't mean you won't in the future. Again, people love to run pipes, ductwork, electrical all through these inaccessible spaces, but at some point something's going to happen and you're going to need to get into that space anyways. Why not treat it the right way rather than just digging out a hole? Mold and mildew is not solved by tightening the enclosure. You know, yes, adding ventilation to your attic in some cases, and air sealing, insulating the attic floor is going to help reduce the likelihood you'll get mold. But if the mold has a food source and water source, it's going to keep growing. Just because you take away something doesn't mean you stop it from growing. Heat pump water heater. It's free dehumidification. If you already have a dehumidifier in the space in the basement, it's something to consider. You're getting two birds with one stone. We talk about insulation and air sealing.
Chris, we'd like to call that two BTUs for the price of one.
There you go.
All right.
Insulation air sealing is pretty easy for the most part, relatively speaking. In terms of return on investment, it's a direct fuel energy savings. One thing people don't think about as often is the trade-in for the smaller or reduced size heating equipment. There is a little bit of a monetary savings. It can be a monetary savings there. The value investment, of course, having lower bills, happier tenants, heat loss reduction, ice dam reduction, reduced mold risk, reduced radon risk, pest reduction, dry enclosed cavities. There's a lot of intangible values with making your enclosure tighter. So easy things, more in recent history than it has been in the past. The advent of mass save, utility-sponsored programs, they make some of these things that used to be very, well, they are labor-intensive, and in some cases they were cost-prohibitive. Things like dense packing your exterior walls with cellulose, or blowing the attic floor, air sealing the attic floor, basic air sealing around the perimeter, largely, if not completely, subsidized by the mass save program. Obviously, the first portion of energy reduction is a lot easier to address than the last portion when you go on completely net zero, but these things are very non-invasive for homeowners. A triple decker, to do it completely top to bottom, assuming it's not a lick of insulation in the building, 3-4 days in a lot of cases. These contractors, this is all they do all day, every day, and it doesn't affect the tenant very much, other than having somebody walk around the inside of the house and make sure you don't blow out a wall cavity, or if they had paneling on the inside and blow out the paneling. Short of those kind of issues, they're very easy to do. And then this is the hard part, which I know we could spend all day talking about this subject alone, but complex deep energy retrofit types of improvements, including the HVAC and the thermal boundary. One picture, you might not see this type of installation very often. This is actually dense pack cellulose. So they built down the roof structure and netted it, and then blew the cavity. So it's a cellulose hot roof that's I don't know if this is 12 or 15 inches thick, but this is a hydro air system, I believe, in this attic, and you had exposed pipes, you had exposed ductwork, things outside the thermal boundary, and then they encapsulated over it, brought it into the thermal boundary, and something that can be done with spray foam can be done with cellulose as well. Some trade-offs for that. It's not necessarily more cost efficient. It's probably about the same price, but you do have a higher thermal mass. It's a greener product, cycle product. People concerned with VOCs, that kind of thing, they may be a benefit to them. So just an alternative way of doing that. Exterior walls, there's a litany of ways to build out the outside or the inside. If you're removing the plaster on the inside and doing spray foam, it's going to be largely dependent on relative to the cost. There's obviously a wide range of prices, and a lot of them tend to be in the six-figure range. But there are some things that can be done if you plan the right way and you're planning it as one comprehensive project. It doesn't have to be cost prohibitive. And of course the value, not just the return on investment, the value of comfort, having comfort, no ice dams, freezing pipes, having a conditioned, usable basement, decarbonization, future proofing your house. Obviously, there's a lot of other benefits outside of that. One thing I don't see often enough that really should be on the simple list is the blower door guided air sealing. People do not do that enough. I feel like even in the mass save world, yes, they do a before and after comparison of how leaky the house was, how leaky it is now, but the real good insulation contractors will actually pressurize the house. They'll go up to the attic with an IR camera, and they'll actually look for the hot spots in the wintertime and cold in the summer. Obviously, air leakage should be the priority whenever we're addressing the thermal boundary of the house.
So I just had my house done there recently through Mass Save, actually, and talk about air leakage. They couldn't pressurize it when they first got there. So
couldn't even get down that far.
They got down to a number. I forget what it was, but they were able to get down to a registered number by the time they left. And I still just have the bulkhead without the door down in the basement. So someday I might do that.
It's on the list. So when we talk about the enclosure, we do have to consider other things. Again, is knob and tube really dead? In my experience, only about half the time is it completely disconnected through the entire house. Natural draft, HVAC. Does your heating equipment have to fight just to vent in the first place? Never mind if you're making that home tighter and reducing air leakage. I'm shocked it's still even permissible. Is the moisture actually mitigated? Are you making your house tight without addressing that moisture solution first? And then is a deep energy retrofit or any combination of those super insulation items, is it feasible in the first place? These are all things you have to consider before moving forward with an enclosure solution. Windows and doors. Again, there's some fuel and electricity savings, and I say some because if you have a broken window or an open window or old leaky single pane window, sure, there's going to be a cost-effective improvement for that. But if you have existing double pane, relatively tight replacement windows, it's going to be more than 30 years before they pay for themselves if you're just doing a one-for-one swap. So it's not necessarily a priority. Airtight, of course, doesn't matter if it's not properly installed. Moisture damage is going to be a lot more expensive than any of the savings you get from replacing those windows. And of course, when it comes to window and door replacement, a lot more of it is on the value. noise reduction. Aesthetics is how does it look? Reduce the moisture infiltration if flashed properly. Adding some security if you have an old broken window, broken door, basement windows especially. Just having a window or door there in the first place is adding some security. Somebody told me a statistic back in the day that adding 70% of your installed cost for replacement windows adds to the value of the home. But I'm pretty sure that was a window salesman, so I take that lightly. Simple things, Energy Star, double, triple pane replacement windows, pocket replacement windows, to be clear. Fiberglass exterior door replacement, air sealing around the windows, the trim. Just doing that alone, I think addressing the air leakage should always be the priority. Just pulling off the trim, using sealant to seal around the window cavity. Now, a little more complicated. New construction versus pocket replacement, actually having the flange, pulling the siding back, flashing it properly. Ideally, that should be the only way to do it, but if you want to do it the right way, that's a recommendation. And then thinking about, do you really need that window the way it's laid out right now? Do you really need a bow window with a lot more surface area, a lot more prone to failure, 3 times the cost versus just having plain flat window like that one? A lot easier to manage. Casement windows, of course, are inherently more airtight, compression seal versus brushes sliding up and down with double hung windows. Ideally, if you can go casement, go casement. Thinking about basement windows, do you need basement windows, especially in some of these older homes? Most energy efficient window is sometimes a wall. Even just adding a rigid foam board in the opening and sealing it off is a lot better for efficiency's sake and security. HVAC, again, this is relatively easy to talk about. Return investment, there's a direct correlation with fuel savings. Usually, I should say potentially, sometimes if you're going from high efficiency natural gas to a full electric system, it's not necessarily a cost savings unless you're incorporating renewable energy into that conversation. There is a monetary value in the cost of maintenance. Combustion appliances, especially oil systems, you have to service them regularly. If you have an all-electric system, you don't have those same types of maintenance costs. If adding a heat pump, cooling adds to the value of the home, there is some monetary value for that. Being able to potentially increase your monthly rent. If you're looking at 2 rental units side by side, one has AC, it might be $50 more a month. That's certainly a value add. Value investment, safety. Again, you're not having combustion appliances you need to worry about anymore. Carbon monoxide, gas, oil. You're not throwing good money at bad necessarily. If you have poor distribution in the home, chimneys not functional anymore or unsafe. If you're adding cooling, it's more rentable. Again, you don't know how much that really adds until you're not able to rent something. The home is prepped for renewable energy integration. You get that free dehumidification with a heat pump water heater, which is always nice. One BTU for 2. Getting ahead of the carbon neutrality initiative, and I know that we all been hearing about that lately. Combustion equipment may not be as serviceable in 2050. It might get real hard to find a gas fitter at that time, or at least one that's not charging an arm and a leg. So this is where we talk about future-proofing the house and considering electric. It's not the only solution, but it's the way the world is going green. So the simple things to do. 1-for-1 higher efficiency replacement if you're keeping with the combustion equipment. On-demand water heating if you're instead of paying, keep a 40-gallon tank, 140 gallons all day, every day. pointed only heating when you need to obviously is more efficient than a full-size tank. Smart thermostats, which I'm going to argue aren't necessarily energy savers. The way people use these things, and ramping up and ramping down their systems at will, I would argue that people don't really know how to use these systems and aren't really properly explained how to use these things, and they don't even realize half the time that every time they come near their house, the system ramps up because it's got the geolocation, and they don't even know that it's on. I think dumb programmable thermostats are sometimes smarter than the smart thermostats.
Yeah, maybe somebody should put on a sweatshirt when it gets a little bit cooler, and stuff like vice versa. That's too much ramping up and down. So Isaiah?
Yeah, no, I think like with adoption of like full-scale electrification, like with the heat pumps, you don't want to do setbacks at night and ramp it up during the coldest part of the day. So,
right,
yeah, I don't think it necessarily makes sense when we're pushing for heat pumps all around.
Right.
Just an added expense and complexity and something else that's going to break and cost you $150 to replace.
Exactly. Especially from a homeowner landlord side, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it in most cases. Heat pumps, definitely just set it and forget it. Even if it's a radiant floor system, again, a long ramp up cool down, it's something that heats and cools that slowly. You don't want to have up and down that frequently. Then, of course, the more complicated systems, if you are retaining combustion equipment, you could replumb for more efficient distribution, converting your steam system to a hot water system. You're not having to heat water to 212 degrees in order to get to turn to steam. There's less energy lost in going to a forced hot water system. And obviously simple things like pulling radiators out of wall cavities. A lot of times knee walls, attics, old houses, they just love to run plumbing and distribution wherever they could, but pulling them out of those unconditioned spaces. Same thing with furnaces, hydro air running through unconditioned space, pulling those into the thermal boundary. You don't necessarily have to replace the equipment to make it more efficient. Fuel optimization. If you have an older and more inefficient system or an oil system and you're not ready to get rid of that altogether, subsidizing with heat pump technology or full heat pump solutions, ductless versus ducted heat pump systems, a full VRF system, a residential VRF, which one thing you can kind of consider if you're a property manager. Does it make more sense to have one centralized heating system? And a lot of pushback on, well, we want everybody to have a separate bill, but in reality, it's more efficient for the property manager to manage that system themselves, because these have the heat recovery built into the system. So if you have, 9 of these heads with a single VRF, if one side of the building is calling for heating, one side is calling for cooling, they're more efficient to operate that way. So you could just consider building that into the rent itself rather than having each individual unit have a separate dedicated system. And then, of course, geothermal, although I think it'd be more of a challenge to consider geothermal for the triple deckers specifically, but we'll have yet to see.
Yeah. But Chris, would you look at something like, I see the steam to hot water as perhaps an intermediate step, because that could later on, we could plug in a heat pump to hot water solution and use the same distribution.
Future proofing, so you're changing that distribution so it's more compatible with future heating equipment types. I put it on the complex list only because it's, it depends on the house floors, of course, and can be more cost prohibitive than replacing the heating system alone. But that's certainly a worthwhile preparatory step. Some more things to consider. Can the home even support natural draft combustion anymore? In most cases, it can't. I can't tell you how many conversations I've had to have with plumbers about how they tested the system, it's working just fine, but Mass Safe program, we have to combustion safety test it before we even are able to air seal insulate a home. We have to put the combustion appliance zone in the worst case scenario, meaning we close all the windows and doors, we turn on exhaust fans, we get as much negative pressure in the combustion appliance zone as possible. And if it doesn't vent under those conditions, it's probably not going to vent under a much tighter house. So it's still tough to get across the plumbing community, unfortunately, to that concept. How does switching to high efficiency heat affect the moisture in the basement? It's not enough to just swap out a system that's with something that's more efficient. You have to consider what that does, especially in these older homes. If you have, again, like my house, a fieldstone foundation, you have moisture coming in from time to time. It's not perfectly sealed. If you swap out that old inefficient cast iron boiler with a nice high efficiency combi system, you have to consider, that rising relative humidity because it's not being pulled in by the system and it's not getting that latent heat from the system itself, drying that air. So what happens to that moisture? If you go high efficiency, you have to consider moisture management along with that.
Mm-hmm. Right. So if you switch from steam, you can't use your basement as a dryer anymore. Because
no.
Yeah, we lost when we switched from steam. We lost the snow melt system around our foundation too.
And considering throwing, good money at bad, what's the condition of the chimney? Is it even in good shape? It's always sad to see somebody solve a problem by putting a flue liner in the chimney to an old natural draft piece of heating equipment. It's sometimes a couple $1,000s to install those things when you could have put that into something, put that money to better use. Does any distribution need to be moved if insulating or air sealing? Again, things outside the thermal boundary of the house, should it be moved anyways? Do you have freezing pipes? Will it cause freezing pipes? We have seen, hydro air systems, especially if they don't have glycol running through the system. You insulate the floor of the attic, you might cause a problem. Putting that pipe in a place that used to get a lot of heat. Should HVAC costs be included in the rent with the VRF? If you have a centralized heating system, especially with a multifamily home, it should always be part of your consideration. Can these improvements be done a la carte? Not necessarily. As we talked about with these considerations, how does one thing affect another? Sizing the heating system after you make all these thermal upgrades. You might be able to get away with a smaller system or oversize the system if you do this heating system first before the installation. I don't know why people push so hard on this, but sometimes, especially with 3 families, we'll have the owner on the first floor and tenants on the second and third floor. They'll decide, I want to insulate my walls, but I'm not going to insulate anybody else's walls. Okay. That's not going to help you too much. Right up and out. Nothing changed. You can't insulate. You can't have a weak link. You can't have a weak link in the chain. It all works as one building. Thermal upgrades before mitigating moisture. Best to make comprehensive changes, or at least plans to make comprehensive changes for future proofing, like we talked about, like the distribution, prepping it for the future. So knowing that it's tough to do these things a la carte, what kind of resources do you have? Mass Save does have the 0% heat loan up to $25,000 for single family, $50,000 for multifamily. For things like full electrification, incentives for high efficiency HVAC equipment. They have the prescriptive air sealing, insulation, barrier mitigation, HVAC, even single pane window replacement. Some, if not most categories, do have caps. There is also the new construction side of the program. It's less prescriptive. It does include the more deep energy retrofit measures, but the basic prescriptive program, it's in a lot of cases it covers the cost of installation 100%. I wrote Mass Saves here twice. I'm sorry. Mass CEC has the whole home air source heat pump pilot. Although it's expiring in a couple months, they're relying more heavily on the Mass Save incentives. DOER has alternative energy credits, of course, weatherization assistance program for income eligible tenants. Again, with multifamily, there is even more to offer there. Mass state credits, ground source heat pumps, tax exempt solar photovoltaic and DHW tax credits. Federal tax credits, ground source heat pumps, 26% installed through 2022, down 22% installed through 2023. Same thing with solar, PV and DHW, and electric vehicle taxes. And on top of that, there's the regional incentives. There's lead abatement grants are going to vary by city, of course. Boston has the 3D help loan. This is actually a 0% loan for up to $30,000 for triple deckers, interior and exterior upgrades, which are not necessarily just energy efficiency improvements. These can go towards kitchens, bathrooms, that kind of thing as well. So you can borrow money towards a comprehensive retrofit solution, and $20,000 for 2 to 4 family homes. Worcester has owner-occupied grants up to $25,000 per unit for affordable housing. Non-owner-occupied grants up to $50,000 per unit for affordable housing. So there's a lot of incentive local for these types of projects.
Can you tell us more about this Worcester Housing Now initiative? What do we know about it? It seems pretty significant.
It is. It goes through affordable housing. I don't have a lot of information, truthfully, and I can follow up with a little more on that. This was some kind of cursory research, and I'm sure there's a lot of hoops to jump through in order to get access to that funding, but it is out there.
Yeah, that's a lot. That's even more than the National Grid threw at the DER pilot. Okay. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see where that goes.